One of the fundamental aspects of BDD is collaboration. This is a critical part in a BDD rollout process. By bringing in the three amigos and any other team members who are critical for implementing that user story to collaborate and derive scenarios, ambiguities in the requirements are removed and all team members are kept on the same page. This reduces bugs, and the quality of your product delivery improves drastically when you have a strong collaboration process. It also helps to speed up your delivery as your team knows exactly what they need to implement before starting. Yet many teams either don't start with collaboration at all, or would have some sort of collaboration. But even if you have a strong collaboration process, when you don't have a structure, the collaboration fades away when the actual implementation happens. Remember, people's attention span has been reduced to less than a goldfish, so most in the team would either forget what has been discussed or would have lost focus during the discussion. When they go back to their desk, the discussion becomes fuzzy and the team ends up implementing and testing to their understanding instead of the team's. This is where using a collaboration technique in your BDD process makes a big difference. One of the techniques I have been using in many projects and have found to be effective is called OOPSI. This technique was originally formed by Jenny Martin and Pete Buckney. OOPSI stands for Outcome, Output, Process, Scenario, Input. The beauty about OOPSI is it puts the business outcome at the top, so the team always starts with what should be the business outcome of implementing the story. It doesn't start with how, i.e. how the story should be implemented. This changes the whole thing with the team focused on the business value. The scenarios that get derived focus on that, which ends up providing the highest business value. In this video, let's walk through an example of how you could use OOPSI for a given user story. This is a typical user story which is about the alumni and student registration process. It has all the right elements of a user story with the expected acceptance criteria. Before you start implementing the user story or start any development activities, start with an OOPSI. For this, typically, you would get your three amigos, the developer, tester, and the product owner or business analyst, along with any other team members for the OOPSI collaboration process. Establishing the right collaboration process would reduce your bugs drastically and reduce the cost of development. As you can see from this graph, the later the bugs are found, the more expensive it gets to fix. To begin with an OOPSI, typically, the business analyst or the product owner would explain the story and what the business outcome should be. The team has the opportunity to discuss the business values/outcomes and may give their own input questioning each outcome and, if possible, improving it. They may even come up with other outcomes for that story, which the business might not have thought about. Once the outcomes are defined, then the team discusses the output required to achieve each outcome. The outputs could be anything that is going away from the application or shown to the user, including anything the tester needs to check. For example, values in a database. Typically, the tester should drive this discussion, as they are primarily involved in testing the output. While discussing, make sure that each outcome is taken and discuss what output is required to achieve those outcomes. In this example, for acceptance criteria 1, the team could consider testing the data that gets stored successfully in the database, and the data that is shown to the user after successful registration. And for acceptance criteria 2, the team could consider checking the database to make sure no values are stored and the right error messages are shown to the error. One of the important aspects to check is to ensure the right messages are shown to the user and are in sync with the company's standards and expectations. In many projects, these details are ignored during collaboration, and as a result, an incorrect, or more often, a grammatically incorrect message is shown to the user, since these messages are coded by the developers who may not understand the nuances of showing the right messages to the users. Once the outputs are defined, then the team can discuss the process they require to achieve that output. This is mainly driven by the developer, as they would know the implementation details. This could be an existing process, but might require modification to implement the desired output or a completely new process. By defining this process, the developer is very clear about the implementation up front, saving several hours and any ambiguities when it comes to developing the code. Once the process is defined, the team can discuss different scenarios. Already defined outcomes, outputs, and process flow diagrams are used as an input to define the scenarios. The entire team participates in this, and the business analyst / product owner collates the scenarios as they're closer to the business and would understand the impact of each scenario. The key to deriving scenarios is to empower the team to come up with as many scenarios as possible, and not to restrict or ignore any scenarios given. The more the team gets involved, the better their understanding of the story is. Once the scenarios are derived, then the team, led by the business analyst or product owner, can apply Moscow to prioritize them. This would be a much more efficient process as all possible scenarios are discussed, and the ones that would have a maximum impact on the business are prioritized. Finally, the team discusses the input required for each scenario. The input could be anything that is required to implement or test each scenario. It could be the UI element name and value, or if it is an API, the details for any given API. This is mainly driven by the tester, as they would require all of this information to successfully implement the scenario. So, at the end of OOPSI, the team would know the scenarios that would provide maximum business values, the output for each scenario, the process flow diagram to achieve that output, and the input required for each scenario. Dev knows what scenarios need implementing, its input values, output values, and the process flow diagram. Tester knows what scenarios need testing, what output values should be tested, and what input values are required to test the scenarios. Business analyst or product owner. They know what scenarios will be delivered as part of the user story, and will be sure that the user story is well understood by the team, and that all possible scenarios expected by the business will be addressed when the team delivers the user story. Project manager or scrum master. Since the user story is now split into small scenarios, the project manager or scrum master will have much better control of tracking it. All they need to discuss in the stand-up is the scenarios that are implemented. So, for example, if a user story has 10 scenarios and the team has completed only one after 3 days in a 2-week sprint, then the Scrum Master can have a more meaningful discussion to see if the team requires additional help. This is much more effective than waiting until the end of the sprint and finding the user story is not completed. Typically, when something like OOPSI is not followed, the teams usually start with input. When that is the case, the process is more like ISPU, which you badly need to avoid. Once the scenarios are derived, you could use those scenarios to automate in minutes using NOCODE BDD, as shown here. Automating BDDs using NOCODE BDD is very simple. All you have to do is define your features, scenarios, and steps as you would normally do. And then you click on the step definitions to automate your step definitions. In this example, I'm going to show you a simple REST API automation. In the first step, I'm going to use a when keyword to call a REST API. And then in the next step, I'm going to use a then keyword to assert a REST API response. All I'm doing is clicking on step definitions, click new step definition, send a REST API request, input any API and any other information you want. In the next step, I'm going to assert the REST response. You can assert for a message or for the status. In this case, I'm going to assert for a response status of 200. And that's it. I'm done with the automation. All I have to do is click run and then I can see the output. It's as simple as that. Similar to APIs, you can automate browsers without writing Selenium code, relational databases, MQ, and you can write your own scripts for those edge cases.